Hi viewers, today video by #DailyVias. We begin with breaking news on the war in Ukraine and new this hour the race #DailyVias against time to deliver weapons to the Ukrainian military in anticipation of a fierce battle coming in from Mariel. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky saying today he wants peace, he wants a war to end and is willing to put aside emotions to negotiate with those who are torturing his nation, but at the same time Maxar Technology says these satellite images captured Friday show a military convoy east of Kharkiv. They say that convoy was 8 miles long, made up of hundreds of armored vehicles, trucks with towed artillery and support equipment, and it was moving south. Ukraine won the battle for Kiev. Now another battle is coming, the battle for Donbas, and of course we are preparing to it, working with our partners to get all necessary weapons, and the United Kingdom has been taking the lead in working with us on the issues of which we need the most, such as armored vehicles or short vessel weapons to contain the Black Sea Fleet of the Russian Federation. U.S. officials say they are also working feverishly to get Ukraine ready for battle in the south. We are doing everything we can as the United States, working around the clock to deliver our own weapons, and as the foreign minister just said, organizing and coordinating the delivery of weapons from many other countries so that Ukraine has what it needs. Weapons are arriving every day, including today. Meanwhile, the Russian military today claiming it destroyed a Ukrainian armored personnel carrier and a column of Ukrainian combat vehicles and air defense units, and NBC News has confirmed that Russia has installed a new military general, Alexander Dornikov, in charge of the war in Ukraine. We'll have more on that in just a moment. Also new today, Ukrainian soldiers showed reporters what they say is an abandoned Russian base camp near Kharkiv, and a new warning from the Klitschko brothers, one of Mayor of Kyiv, that even though the actions appear to be shifting south everywhere in Ukraine remains an open target. Pulling out of Kiev doesn't mean that the war is over, they just changed the strategy. They're in the east and the south of the country, extremely active, and while we're talking, the fights in the east and the south of the country are still going, and obviously we are expecting them to be back and again targeting the capital. We have a number of reporters, NBC News crews covering these developments. NBC's Molly Hunter is in Kyiv for us, Raf Sanchez and Levi and Dasha Burns in Warsaw. First to Mali and Kyiv, where British Prime Minister Boris Johnson's symbolic appearance is still making headlines. Mali, in the last few days we've seen President Zelensky host some of Europe's biggest leaders. Now overnight he's warning the world that Russia is targeting all of Europe, saying Putin will not stop at Ukraine's borders. The Ukrainian capital, which some predicted would fall to Russian hands weeks ago, now a safe enough venue to host world leaders. A surprise visit from Britain's Prime Minister Boris Johnson. I'm traveling on a fantastic Ukrainian Railways train through to Kiev from Poland, arriving in Kyiv yesterday afternoon, not appearing to wear any body armor. The two leaders walking through Kiev city center, sending a powerful message: Ukraine is still in control. Britain announcing more than $130 million in new military aid, including 800 anti-tank missiles. We will give you the support that you need, economic support, but also of course the defensive military support. Zelensky calling the UK our most sincere friend, thanking him for leading on sanctions. Johnson also condemning Putin's actions. His war crimes have permanently polluted his reputation and the reputation of his government. The additional aid coming as Ukraine says the Russians have already launched the first stage of the offensive in eastern Ukraine, adding the Russian troops which pulled out of the north are not yet ready to fight in UK. Defense officials saying this morning Russia is recruiting troops discharged in the last 10 years and from the Transnistria region of Moldova, a sign of just how many troops they've lost on the battlefield. The fight for the East may determine the outcome of this war and the fate of the people caught in the middle. In eastern Ukraine, in Kramatorsk, 2 days after the attack, trains are still suspended, civilians scrambling to find other ways out. I'm ready to give what I have to those who will get me out of here, she says, to a quiet place as long as it's in Ukraine. And here in Borodyanka, firefighters still searching for bodies through the wreckage of houses, residents trying to get by. This woman recalls they were putting explosives under dead people. She says, my children have been under the rubble for 36 days, but we weren't allowed to go in and remove the bodies. Now Russia denies accusations like this, but as the battle moves east, Russia is reshuffling its battlefield commander. They put in place a man named Alexander Dvornikov. He is accused of atrocities in Syria, like calling in airstrikes on civilian residential homes, on hospitals, and carrying out the scorched earth policies that Russia has become so known for. I'll send it back to you. All right, Molly Hunter, we appreciate that. And for more on that, plus breaking today, new word from Ukraine's foreign minister on what he believes the country needs to win this war. Let's go over to NBC's Ralph Sanchez joining us live from La v Ukraine ref earlier this week. Dmitro Kuleba said that what this country needs is weapons. Weapons, what is he saying now? Well, he still has weapons on his mind, Corey. He says the Ukrainian military is going to need daily supplies of anti-tank missiles, ammunition, armor. They say it's not good enough to have these big drops every couple of weeks. They need new flows coming from the West every single day. He also talked interestingly about what it's like for him as a diplomat to sit across the table from Russian officials who go on TV every day and deny the reality of these war crimes that appear to have been committed in the suburbs around Kiev. But he said, as difficult as that is for him as Ukrainian, he will do it if it prevents future massacres like the one we saw in Bucha. He also said Ukraine may not be a member of NATO, but this is very much NATO's fight, because if Putin is not defeated here in Ukraine, he will go after NATO countries next. Take a listen. We propose to the West and to NATO a fair deal. You provide us with everything that we need and we fight so that you don't have to step up in the fight, into the fight when Putin decides to test Article 5 of the North Atlantic Treaty and attack of one of NATO countries. Now Mali mentions that new Russian general in charge of the invasion here in Ukraine. He is a man with a reputation for brutality in Syria. He was sent there by Vladimir Putin to prop up the regime of Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad, and he carried out his president's orders, but in the process he flattened Syrian cities. Thousands of Syrian civilians were killed by Russian troops, and this is a very worrying sign if you are one of those Ukrainians sheltering in Kharkiv or Mariupol right now of what may be to come as this war shifts to the east. Corey, all right, we appreciate that. Thank you so much. Stay safe in Lviv, and we'll get back to you for the latest developments soon. But first we want to bring in retired Army General Barry McCaffrey for just a little bit more breakdown on all of this. Just these details that we're hearing coming out today, some of these major military moves. General, thank you for being in with us this morning. Ukraine says that Britain is giving them what they need. The U.S. also saying they're providing weapons. So decode this for us. What do you think is actually being said to Ukraine? Well, Corey, it has been a simply magnificent performance by NATO, by the United States, by individual countries like United Kingdom to come together in a very short period of time. I served in NATO headquarters for 2 years in a political headquarters. I used to tell people it takes 5 to 15 years to make a decision, so in a matter of weeks there's been a remarkable support. Secretary Lloyd Austin of Defense, Secretary Blink in the State Department, Secretary Yellen at Treasury, CIA Director Burns. They have built a global consensus to support Ukraine. Never mind NATO and individual countries. It's a new phase of the war now. They're trying to think through it. They're going to have to provide the tools to these incredibly courageous Ukrainian military units to fight a war of maneuver and to try and get the Russians, who are now on their back foot, before they can reposition, before they can rehab these units. Big challenge, but I think the Biden team has been a remarkable group in pulling all this together. That force of maneuver that you've been mentioning, that Ukraine needs to try to kind of position themselves into to try to gain the upper hand. What do they need to do in Mariupol to keep Mariupol? Well, Mariupol simply astonishing. I cannot imagine how they have held out this long. They're essentially been circled, cut off. They're being bombarded from the sea by the Russian Navy, who have been unimpeded largely. They struck one Russian Navy ship and sunk it, and they've damaged a couple more. But well, I think that the war is changing in many ways. Finally, we're starting to provide essentially offensive weapons to the Ukrainians to try and give them the ability, whether it's tanks or artillery or rocket long-range artillery, or the Brits have now promised Harpoon anti-ship missiles. The U.S. is getting us Switchblade remote-piloted lethal drones in there. We're giving the tools now. Where I think the war is going to change its character dramatically in the coming weeks, but it's a closely run thing. Ukraine can't live for a year or longer being pounded with impunity by Russian long-range cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, artillery and aircraft. So we've got to give them a qualitative edge to change the dynamics of this fight. So we've been reporting on the hits that the Russian military has taken, but we're now seeing these new satellite images. This war machine 8 miles long headed south. Is it cause for concern? Does this mean that Russia's military might be strengthening more than we know or want to admit? Well, I think they're in bad shape. I think this institution's damaged considerably. The leadership at tactical levels turned out to be largely incompetent. The generals lost control of the invasion force. 250,000 troops. They've suffered enormous casualties, more than 25,000 killed and wounded. They've had units surrender. So they are now repositioning, but I would say that this new commander, General Denorbakov, who is a brute hero of the Russian Federation from dropping barrel bombs on innocent Syrian civilians, he's got his work cut out for him. The institution is damaged, the value system, the leadership of the Russian armed forces is poor. He doesn't have a joint headquarters at this stage. It's hard for me to imagine they're going to be able to do an integrated air-land-sea campaign, but again, the Ukrainians are smaller forests. The Russians have enormous momentum, and Putin will never give up until his army has been largely destroyed in its effectiveness, and he's put 60% of the Russian armed forces into Ukraine trying to take over this land. And generally, you may have heard the foreign minister of Ukraine suggesting that if Russia hits inside a NATO country, Ukraine would fight so that NATO would not have to. If NATO gives Ukraine enough weapons, is that what you're hearing as well? Or is there another way to interpret that? Look, NATO has incredible power, air, land, sea, economic power. The Russians are 120th the GNP of the United States and Europe combined. There is very little possibility that Putin in the next 5 to 10 years can take on NATO militarily. There could be provocations, or could be accidents, but that's not very likely. We've also seen the United States and our allies reinforce Eastern Europe, so we put people on the ground in Romania and Poland in the 3 Baltic states to indicate politically our determination. I don't think that's a question. The question is, how can this giant country, Ukraine, 40+ million people being tortured by Russia, how can we give them the tools to fight for themselves? I think President Biden rightfully has said we don't want to intervene being in the direct combat against the Russians. So now the real question is, how do we prop up Ukraine with the tools they need to defend themselves? Okay, General, in the last few seconds we have very quickly, where are we in this war? Do you see an end? Well, I think there's going to be an end. I think the Ukrainians are never going to give up their land, so there may be a ceasefire at some point in which Donbass and the Crimea remain under Putin's control, but I don't think the Russians, as long as we stand with them with solidarity, I don't think the Russians can even dream now of integrating Ukraine as a vassal state back into the Russian Federation, so we're in it for the long run along with the Ukrainians. General, we appreciate your time today. Very good insight. We're going to have you back on as this continues to develop. Thank you so much. Good to be with you. Corey, up next, she might be described as France's version of Donald Trump, and she's got a lot of French voters worried what they're doing about it today. Is the White House preparing for a recession? Well, we're going to constantly monitor our economic data, but what our economic team feels and what the U.S. government economic team feels is that the economy has a very strong basis. Our recovery has been incredibly strong on most measures. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki projecting optimism on the economy as some experts suggest a recession is looming. Joining me now, Peter Baker, Chief White House Correspondent for The New York Times and MSNBC political analyst. Peter, welcome and good afternoon. You hear there Jen Psaki saying White House economist, not necessarily suggesting that a recession is inevitable. Is that just the message the administration wants to get across, or is that the truth of how the administration sees it, and how do you interpret it? Well, look, they've gotten in trouble before for misestimating basically what was happening with inflation. They dismissed those who expressed concern last year that inflation was not only going to be on the rise, but it wasn't transitory, as the White House was saying, and the White House obviously was wrong about that. So I think they want to be careful about making projections at this point. At the same time, they've got a really complicated economic story to tell here. There is obviously very positive news on the jobs front. Unemployment is at or near a 50-year low. The new jobless claims at or near a 54-year low. Many jobs are out there for those who want the wages going up, but that inflation is what people see every day when they go to the store, when they go to fulfill the pump, pull the gas tank at the pump, and I think that is hurt President Biden's numbers, and it's eroded public confidence in the economy, even though there are good aspects to what's going on in the White House is very sensitive to that. So according to a new ABC News Ipsos poll, there is a little bit of possible optimism for the White House because 71% of Americans blame Putin and 68% blame oil companies for these higher gas prices. You talked about how the Biden administration has taken a hit because of the inflation, but does this at all help the administration on this issue? Well, obviously President Biden would like to be able to point to somebody else and say that somebody else or something else is to blame. Obviously the war with Russia and Ukraine is affecting energy markets, but inflation at the pump preceded the war, and I think that the problem for them is, even though many Americans do blame Putin and may blame in fact oil companies, is the Democrats would like them to. They are accusing them of price gouging, that it contributes to a broader sense that the country is sort of not on the right path. Right, there's a very sour mood among the public right now despite the good jobs numbers. If you look at the polling, you see that many Americans feel like the country is not on the right track, and that I think that the broader perception is what is hurting President Biden, and things like the gas prices contribute to that, even if they don't necessarily think that it's President Biden's fault. And I think that the problem for them is they have had some good news that has been overshadowed by the war. For instance, covert numbers coming down. The death toll each day now is less than a quarter of what it had been, but there's a worry that it's going to go back up, and so you have this roller coaster effect that the Biden administration has been coping with now for more than a year. Just when you think things are starting to get a little bit better, you start to see some worrying signs like we're seeing with Kobe. People are starting to re-up the mask wearing and talk about how they do need to be much more careful than they had been in previous weeks. You mentioned this before. I want to put the numbers out there from that Ipsos poll. 68% of people disapproved how President Biden is handling those gas prices even after that historic release from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. Just proves your point that Americans aren't necessarily done blaming the administration quite yet for the higher gas prices. The biggest bright spot though in the poll for President Biden, 58% approve of his handling of the pandemic even with that sudden rise in cases. For example, in the DC area after that gridiron dinner, it feels like most Americans want to be over it, but of course the White House being cautiously optimistic on that front. Are there any fears though that these new COVID cases could cause a backslide? Yeah, I mean, look, they got ahead of themselves last year where they just declared that basically we had achieved independence from the pandemic. That's the phrase I think they used around the 4th of July. Obviously that proved to be premature. The Omicron wave then came and we had a terrible fall and in winter, so they would like to think that the current lower numbers would persist, but you're starting to see the uptick that you mentioned. The gridiron dinner, what a metaphor. The gridiron dinner is an annual dinner of DC elites and reporters every year. So far, 67 people who went to that dinner just a little while ago, about a week or so ago, have now tested positive, including 3 cabinet members and many other bold-faced names. So I think that's a lesson that basically we may want to think Kohler is over, but it's not. The question is whether this new wave is going to be as deadly as the previous ones. Are we going to fade into or phase into an era when covert exists but as a perennial but not necessarily as deadly or severe a health risk? And that's the question we don't really know the answer to right now. And Peter, I have one last question for you that we have to get to. It's a really important one, this one from overseas. How much attention is being paid by the White House to the French election? Is there any fear over the linchpin figures in NATO might be replaced by what some describe as a Trump-like figure? Yeah, definitely. I think they're concerned about that election. Marine Le Pen has herself said that her policies reflect those of Vladimir Putin. She is part of that wave of European populist figures on the right who have identified themselves more with Russia than they have with some of the Western values, and Macron has been a valuable ally, I think, to President Biden in this confrontation with Russia. So if they're watching the election closely, I think that they feel confident that President Macron will ultimately prevail on a runoff, even if he has to have a second round with Marine Le Pen. But her rise in the last few weeks has been rather remarkable given the European blowback to what Russia is doing in Ukraine. You would have thought that might have hurt her, and said it doesn't seem to have. Yeah, if one candidate does not get at least 50 of the vote, we are looking at that runoff election. All right, Peter, thank you for being in with us this afternoon. We appreciate it. It is a nagging question for Democrats. How do you motivate your base with the midterms coming up fast and with Donald Trump potentially on the horizon for 2024? There's much debate about what it may come down to, and one person says they come down to 3 words. We'll tell you what those 3 words are coming up. Now to our other top stories. We're following DC's gridiron dinner is looking like a super spreader event. At least 67 people who attended last weekend have now tested positive for COVID, including 3 cabinet secretaries, 2 House members, and 1 senator. Pakistan is poised to have a new prime minister. Its parliament voted to oust its leader Imran Khan earlier this morning amid soaring inflation and a souring relationship with the country's military. Meanwhile, French voters are choosing their next leader as well. Polls close this afternoon. In the first round of the presidential election, Emmanuel Macron is seeking a second term but faces tough competition from the far right like Marine Le Pen. Unless one candidate wins more than half the vote, there will be a second round of voting 2 weeks from today. We'll have a live report out of Paris. Coming up now to the war in Ukraine as battles loom in the east. Officials are urging residents to escape. More than 7 Million people are now displaced inside Ukraine according to the UN, and more than 4.5 million others have fled the country altogether, over half of them now in Poland. That's where we find NBC's burns in Warsaw Forest and Dasha. Many people fleeing across the border, but you also met with other people going the other direction as well. What did they tell you? Yeah, Corey, you know, for the first several weeks of the war, when you went to one of these border crossings, traffic was going in one direction from Ukraine to Poland, from war to safety, but now as we spend time at these crossings, you see traffic going in both directions. Some families making the difficult decision that living in danger at home is better than not being home at all. In fact, between today and last Sunday, so 1 week in 1 week, 157,000 Ukrainians returned back home. And Corey, the reasons are sometimes as simple as wives miss their husbands, parents miss their children, and children miss their parents. Here are just some of our conversations at the border. Do you miss your dad? Yes, yes, I do. What do you want to say to him when you get back? We want our children not to be afraid to go out of their homes. We don't want to see and hear shootings. That's what we want the most. We want families to be together. We don't want husbands to be separate from their wives. We want our women to go back to Ukraine because they all fled. They want families to be together. That is something we've heard from so many of the people we're speaking with, and that family you just heard from there, they are from an area that is still occupied by Russia, so they can't actually get back home to their primary residence. And as you know, unfortunately, so many people do not have a home to go back to after all of the destruction that we've seen. But they told us that they just want to be on Ukrainian soil. They are Ukrainians. They want to be in their country with their people at this difficult time. Corey and Dasha Burns reporting for us from Warsaw, Poland, and we continue every day to hear about these stories about the incredible spirit of the Ukrainians. Thank you for bringing that to us. Those sky-high gas prices and oil, executives think, well, it's not their fault, but are they passing the buck and taking yours? My next guest has a lot to say about this. Next, new today, a little relief for American drivers. The national average for a gallon of regular gas fell to $4.11. That number last month stood at $4.33 a gallon. Meanwhile, oil industry leaders defended those prices this past week. This is members of the House Energy and Commerce Subcommittee grilled them on the issue. The big oil execs insisted it is not their fault. We do not set or have significant influence over the price of our products. No single company sets the price of oil or gasoline. The market establishes the price. Shell does not set or control the price of crude oil. Similarly, Shell does not set or control the price that consumers pay. Joining me now, Texas Congressman Mark VCA, Democratic member of the House Armed Services and Energy and Commerce Committees. Congressman, welcome. And all right, you're not on the subcommittee that held the hearing, but these oil companies are something that your committee looks closely at. Yourself, what do you make of this testimony from these executives? Do you think there should be more accountability for higher prices? Well, I think that the oil and gas executives need to be clear about what Congress can do to help bring down prices. I mean, they really haven't said, hey guys, we know that with everything going on in Russia right now, the president trying to make sure that Putin is not the oil giant ever again that he is right now. We know that prices are going to be a little bit higher, but here's what we can do in the meantime. If you look at the Biden administration, it's really impressive what they've done. They've actually approved 34% more federal drilling permits than the Trump administration did their first year in office. And so the president is doing everything that he can, but they need to give us a little bit more direction, and they just have not been clear. Hashtag Daily Bias. How about this debate over the future of Title 42? I want to just shift a little bit over to this because I want to ask you your thoughts on it. Anybody at home who's not familiar with Title 42, this was enacted during the COVID era when Trump was president, and this allows the country to turn away any immigrants based on health concerns. So the Biden administration is now seeking to repeal that policy, but there is a bipartisan effort to halt that repeal until a new policy is put in place to prevent a potential surge of illegal border crossings. Do you yourself support lifting Title 42? Where do you land on that, Congressman? I don't think the Title 42 was intended to be a immigration law. I think the Title 42 was specifically around health care. And as you know, the nation is starting to reopen with COVID-19. We're learning to live with COVID-19. People were going into restaurants and bars and going to dinners as is one of your segments showed a second ago. I mean, we're learning to live with this, and less hospitalizations and deaths start to dramatically rise again like we saw in the early days of COVID. I really don't understand why you would put together while you keep Title 42 in place. I was talking a little bit earlier about the oil and gas prices. One of the things that I think that oil and gas people can do is that they can tell Republicans no more money for you until we can do something about immigration reform, because we need these immigrants obviously to help us produce more oil and gas. The majority of people that work in the Permian Basin are Latino, and I would say when it comes to this immigration reform that we're looking at right now, we absolutely need more people that to come from south of the border to help in the oil patch, and we're not going to be able to get there without them. And when it comes to Title 42, we need to stop looking at this as this is a wedge issue. We need to look to see how we can, especially again with the numbers going down, the COVID numbers going down, and the deaths going down, what we can do to get more people from south of the border to help grow our economy. We need a comprehensive immigration reform bill. We shouldn't be arguing over this Title 42. We shouldn't be arguing over it. No, let me ask you this. Your governor, Texas Governor Greg Abbott, said he's got his own plan in place if there is a surge of border crossings. Listen here, Texas is providing charter buses to send these illegal immigrants who have been dropped off by the Biden administration to Washington, D.C. We are sending them to the United States Capitol, where the Biden administration will be able to more immediately address the needs of the people that they are allowing to come across our border. All right, Jen Psaki called that a publicity stunt, said that Abbott has no legal authority to compel anyone to get on a bus. How would you like to see your state handle any immigrants coming in? I think that Greg Abbott should stop. Again, it is a publicity stunt, and I think the Greg Abbott should stop with the publicity stunts. Help us pass a comprehensive immigration reform deal. If we pass a comprehensive immigration reform bill, again, we can do something about oil and #DailyVias gas prices, and we can do something about the surge at our border. We're arguing over things around immigration that are to me just useless and not really going to do much. I mean, again, looking at this Title 42 controversy, it's really unnecessary. Let's pass a comprehensive immigration reform bill. It'll help our economy, it'll help these families, and it'll help lower gas prices and turn everything around. That's what Greg Abbott needs to be focused on, is how we can save Texas families money and not trying to look for a wedge issue that is going to just divide America. I think it's ridiculous. Right, looking forward in a more positive way in what we can do to build this country up, not break it down. With the last few seconds with you, I just want to make something clear, because you brought up the oil and gas price again. Of course, top of mind for many Americans. You do not blame the oil executives for these high gas prices. Is that correct? Did I understand you correctly? What I'm saying is that the oil and gas executives need to be more clear about what we can do to help bring down prices. I think that again, one area where they can be helpful is if they would say, hey, let's do something about comprehensive immigration reform. Y'all are arguing over Title 42. We could use some of these workers. We're already using a lot of them in the oil patch. A majority of the people working in the oil patch are immigrants. Let's put together a system that will bring them out of the shadows and help bring down prices, and we need to hear more of that from oil and gas executives, and not just we're just going to look to deflect blame from us. It's just that they need to be more clear about what we can do to bring down prices and stop a lot of this arguing that has just become so vitriolic that literally neither side is willing to move. Congressman Mark Veazey, that's right, we appreciate it. We're going to be looking closely to what your state is in the midterms and in the next year moving forward. Thank you. You probably missed it, another Trump rally last night, but a prominent Democrat says the party cannot ignore these and needs to pay attention and take notes. Now to Selma, North Carolina, where Donald Trump returned to the rally stage last night to ratchet up support for the GOP. There were a number of guest speakers, most notably Congressman Madison Cawthorn, who has been at the center of controversy for comments that he made about his Republican colleagues this week. NBC's Antonia Hilton is in Raleigh. Antonia, did you get a sense that Trump was using this rally to tease a potential 2024 run? Corey, absolutely. Look, this rally was all about urging supporters to build toward that point, and in doing so Trump was basically making the argument that they need to send Republicans into the House and into the Senate and rebuild a Republican majority. The rally also featured a lot of the familiar grievance, a lot of lies about the 2020 election, but also, as you mentioned, a lot of eyes were on one of the special guests, Representative Madison Cawthorn. And Cawthorn's been in the news a lot recently for controversial comments he's made. He called the president of Ukraine, Zelensky, a thug. He said on a podcast that he had been invited to orgies and had witnessed people using cocaine in Washington, D.C., and all those remarks have led some of his colleagues, his Republican colleagues to pull away from him and to grow incredibly frustrated with him in recent days, but if the crowd here in North Carolina was any indication, Corey, look, those comments haven't cost him support among conservatives in this state. In fact, he received one of the warmest welcomes aside from Trump of the night. Take a listen to some of what he said at the rally. Tell you the levers of power in Washington, D.C. are controlled by dark forces. We have the halls of Congress that are being shuffled by cowards. We have a geriatric despot who sits in the Oval Office. If we put Donald Trump back in command in the White House, my friends, we will embrace the spirit of our founding fathers. We will investigate Anthony Fauci and send him to jail for lying to Congress. Madison's seat is being challenged by 7 other Republicans, and so Catherine's race is really going to be an interesting one to watch, because it's really going to be all about how firm Trump's grip is over the GOP at this time, how valuable an endorsement from the former president is at this time, and you know all that is going to be seen as we get closer and closer now to the May 17th primary here in the state. Corey, Antonia Hilton in Raleigh. Thanks, Antonia. Well, on the heels of that, one progressive lawmaker is urging his party to take a lesson from a surprising source, Mr. Donald Trump himself. Congressman Ro Khanna telling Politico, quote, "One of the things as terrible as Trump is he does these rallies so there's this sense of movement. We need a #DailyVice sense of motion and energy and excitement." Joining me now, Don Calloway, Democratic strategist and founder of the National Voter Protection Action Fund, and Susan Del Percio, Republican strategist and MSNBC political analyst. Welcome into both of you. Don, first question to you: be more like Donald Trump? I guess that's not a question, you already have the first name. Never seriously does have a point here. He kind of does. And listen, I am very slow to come on national airwaves and criticize my president and the vice president, but we've been saying from the beginning they've got to get out there and sell their agenda to the public. Whether it's the bipartisan infrastructure bill or Build Back Better, part of the success of Obamacare was that Barack Obama spent summer of 2009 out on this nationwide tour explaining to people what he was doing and explaining why it would be something that mattered to their everyday lives, and writ large we haven't really seen that out of this administration. The flip side of that is they've been governing, they've been passing a transformative infrastructure funding bills that have the opportunity to promote public-private partnerships that can really change regions. They've been working on a war in Ukraine. Surprise, that's a new thing. That's part of the burden of leadership as well. So they haven't really had the opportunity to #DailyVice get out there and cross crisis across the country on Air Force One and Air Force Two alike. Previous administrations have, and they certainly haven't had the opportunity to do it like an unemployed, twice impeached grifter of a president has. Governing, what a concept. Susan, before I get more from Ro Khanna, I want to ask you about Congressman Madison Cawthorn. How do you interpret that warm welcome he got? Is he the future of the GOP? Absolutely not. He is the future of Donald Trump and his shrinking base, and that's what you saw there, a very shrinking base. I'm not saying that the Republican Party is going to come out of Donald Trump in for even 6 years, but even this. Thanks for watching this video by #DailyVice channel. Following